touch of sugar syrup, maybe with a hint of anise on this. You put it back into this chamber, close the lid. This time use light once again. You open this sliding dovetail, light comes in, you watch as one bee moves inside that first chamber. And you close, and then close this. And then you wait for 5 minutes. And so now the bee is pretty tickled. She's gathering up basically a free lunch. And so after about 5 minutes, you open the lid, and this is where it just takes some practice and positioning your body correctly. She will come out once again wanting to escape and also moving it towards the light, and she'll begin to take larger and larger orbits, always keeping her head fixated on this source. She moves gradually higher and higher and higher, and she's mapping and anchoring the location of this and everything that surrounds. There's a Buick over there, a red building here, some plants over here. She's mapping this environment so she can find it again. So now she's up about 75, 100 feet. She's about the size of a pin. And then she darts in a beeline, the proverbial beeline, back to that unknown nesting site. So you have the first sense of where she's going. So you repeat the process, release another bee. This time you get your body in a position where maybe the sun will glisten on their wings with a little more clarity. And you do it, and you do it, and you do it over and over again. And you establish a visual beeline. Okay, so now you have to wait. And if they take the bait, they come back. And that coming back could be a half an hour, depending on the distance of the hive. They come in, you left the lid open, and they gingerly kind of fly in, circle around. They're unsure about what the hell this is. It doesn't look like any flower they've ever seen before. And they re-enter the box, and they take another drink. She comes out, repeats the process, this time a little more quickly, and she continues mapping this source, and then darts off. So now we've got maybe bees going to the northeast. And you keep repeating this process, and the more bees that go back and forth, who will start dancing for their hive mates back at the unknown nesting site, will start recruiting and flying in. So you have a very strong bee line. Now in Berlin, this could take hours or days, and depending on weather conditions, the political dynamics of going across the border, it could be a very lengthy process. Once the bees have taken the bait, they're kind of inside here. Sometimes you can just hold the honeycomb in your hand, and you walk maybe 100 feet, 100 meters on the line towards the northeast. You put this down again. You repeat the process. The bees come out, they realize they've been moved, and they realign themselves, and then they refix on this new location. So in a series of steps of about 100 meters or 100 yards, you work your way back to the unknown tree or source. And if it was New England, you'd be looking for a bee tree somewhere in the woods. So in a series of incremental steps, you try to locate where that hive is. You can get a little fancy and put a drop of color on their backs and time them so you get a sense of both direction and distance, depending on how long it takes that bee to come back and forth. If you go so far as that the bees have reversed, then you walk right by the hive and you have to back up. So there's a sense of that the bees will tell you where they are. So it's easier said than done. It takes a lot of patience. Some of my classes from the late 80s and early 90s, we used to do workshops in this out in the woods. Everybody would make their own bee box, and we would spend a lot of time searching for bees and having pretty remarkable afternoons. But in principle, does that make sense, just loosely described? Okay, let me pass this around. Okay, so now we've got one hive of bees, and let me show you where we did with that. Because now this sort of lays the groundwork for the project. This was the backyard to the Kunstler house. All of you have seen images of the wall, the sort of no man's land between the two cities. We were constantly under surveillance. It was a fairly, I like the stories about immersion. Invite me out to Veer, and we can tell a lot of stories about Berlin in 1989, but I'm going to let those go. Durst Grunbein, who was an East German former soldier who somehow was assigned to me. This guy has a lot of mystery to him, but he was a wonderful partner in translating, working with me. I had a box for him, so we were capturing bees together, releasing them. He's turned out to be the most notable poet in Germany right now. and my thank you to him was a voice recorder so that he could record his thoughts and words, and I gave it to him as a thank you gift, and he's now become a major poet in Germany and Western Europe. And this is a stage of the tracking process. You can see using yellow boards to help the bees find it. Color is always critical. All my little kit of bottles and anise and miscellaneous. The bees have taken the bait, as you can see. At this point, the box is not so critical. I can just literally carry that little comb of honeybees and walk them along the line. Generally, this was seen as very suspicious, particularly in East Berlin. The kids were always the ones who would be willing to try. Their parents would kind of let them loose with me. I had 3 boxes so I could give the kids some boxes to play with. And we're getting the first good sighting of bees. The bees are flying over this hedgerow, disappearing down into these central courtyards of homes in Berlin. And the first hive. So it took weeks, 3 weeks of working on the streets of Berlin, and the use of Joseph Beuys's term in action on the street, a kind of performance and process that was immensely interactive. Found these bees. Durst and I were immensely tickled. We were giggling like little boys over the fence, and lo and behold, the beekeeper shows up, and Herr Pickert, Mr. Pickert, who's got that little bee smoker that I brought an example in from Germany. That's how they smoke their bees, is often with these little pipe smokers. And he was so surprised that these 2 odd ducks had found him by this tracking process, and I showed him the box, and then Durst would explain in German. And here's one thing that maybe some of you know who have a strong interest in certain types of processes and craft, is wherever you go, you have a common language through making. And so beekeeping as a craft and as a process is practiced generally the same throughout the world with slight variations. So he and I could jump right in and start pulling honey off his hive, which he wanted to do. And he had a wonderful thing that I later adopted, was using a bee wing instead of a brush to kind of move the bees around a bit. I went home and definitely got that going. So I have a wing now. And so I was quite enchanted with this. We're pulling honey off, and there's usually 10 frames per box, so we'll pull the honey off, shake the bees off, and then the honey would be spun out in a centrifugal extractor.
What is the bee wing? Is it a piece of wood?
No, it's a wing. It's a bird's wing. I'm sorry, I said a bee wing.
Yeah.
It's a bird wing. and they use it just with the feathers to lightly dust the bees. And so I went home and I found the gull's wing on one of the beaches in San Francisco and let it dry out a bit, and then that became one of my tools as well. But again, this integration of one life form to another in this kind of cooperative mix, I enjoyed the poetry of that. Now, what's common, and what I would have done if I'd had some fresh honey, is I would have brought honey from my operation. I'm producing very, very little honey anymore, partly because of the survival realities that have been identified. But part of it is a time factor for me. I'm spread a little too thin now, and I'm trying to rebuild my beekeeping. My goal is to keep bees for 50 years, and I'm at least getting close to that 40-year point. But beekeepers will always give
What are you
bottles.
going to do after 50 years?
Oh, I'll probably be dead by then. There was a wonderful book by Charles Miller called 50 Years Among the Bees, and I've come so close to giving up at different points, and then the bees and I just kind of get a second wind and keep going. So I'm edging up on 40 years, and I'm hoping I can limp into 50. So anyway, Mr. Pickert was absolutely delighted with this chance meeting. I find this wherever I go in the world that I think you used emerging communities, or what was it? Emergent communities. I find that over and over again, that where I get started in a process, I meet people, people get involved, and they become extraordinarily supportive and generous. And Mr. Pickert gave me his beehive, which you'll see how I completely used it in a very curious way. And he also gave me a sample of honey. What you can't see so well is this block of wax. He gave me this wonderful bit of beeswax that I used for the project And it was non-radioactive, so this was some of his most precious wax. Chernobyl radioactive blast had occurred